February 9th, 1945. 200 Japanese soldiers are charging directly at you. You hear their screams. You smell the gunpowder. And then you realize your entire company has vanished. You are utterly alone. Welcome to Tayabas Ridge in the Philippines. The air is so thick you can taste it, a humid mix of sweat, cordite, and jungle rot. This isn't a battle. It's a nightmare carved into a mountain. And in a muddy foxhole, one man remains. Private First Class John D. Johnson. He isn't a super soldier. He's a 23-year-old from Pennsylvania who suddenly finds himself the only thing standing between the Japanese Imperial Army and a total breakthrough. His unit, the 38th Infantry Division, had been fighting for days to take this godforsaken pass, a place the Japanese themselves called the Funnel of Death. It was a meat grinder of hidden machine gun nests and brutal close-quarters combat. An order finally came down the line. Fall back! A tactical retreat to save the company from being annihilated. But in the fog of war, messages get lost, wires are cut, men are left behind. And here's where the official story begins to fray. The history books will tell you Johnson was inadvertently left in his foxhole, a tragic accident. But the men who survived that day, they whisper a different story. In his hands, Johnson held a 20-pound piece of American steel, the Browning automatic rifle, the BAR. This was not a precision instrument. It was a monster that spat 550 rounds per minute. You didn't aim it. You pointed it at the terror and held on. He watched his company pull back. He watched the last American soldier disappear into the jungle canopy. And he stayed. Think about that for a moment. Everyone is running for their lives. The enemy is closing in. Logic, fear, every survival instinct you possess screams, "Run!" But he did not. The official report is clean, simple. But the truth rarely is. So why would a 23-year-old kid from a small town decide to face an entire enemy force by himself? Was he forgotten? Or did he refuse to leave? The legend tells of a lone sniper, a ghost holding an entire mountain pass against an army. It's a powerful story, but it's not the whole story. The man at the center of it all was not a sniper, and he was not, at first, alone. To understand what happened on that frozen peak, you have to forget the myth and meet the man. His name was Yang Gensi. He wasn't born a super soldier. He was a farmer's son from Jiangsu province, from a village where hunger was a constant guest. He joined the People's Liberation Army in 1944 for reasons that were brutally simple. For food, for shoes, for a chance to be more than a statistic. But he found something else there, a purpose. By 1950, he was a decorated company commander in the Chinese People's Volunteer Army, a man who had already been named a combat hero multiple times, a man who had already proven he would not break. Now picture where he stood, Hill 1071, south of the Chosin Reservoir in North Korea. This wasn't just a hill, it was a frozen spike of jagged rock and ice. The date was November 29, 1950. The temperature had plummeted to nearly 40 degrees below 0 Celsius. At these temperatures, steel becomes brittle. Skin freezes to any metal it touches. Your own breath hangs in the air like a ghost. This is where Yang and the 3rd Company were ordered to make their stand. Their mission was direct and utterly impossible. Hold this hill at all costs. Below them, the American 1st Marine Division, one of the most formidable fighting forces on the planet, was desperately trying to fight its way out of an encirclement. Hill 1071 was the cork in the bottle. It controlled the only road south. If the hill fell, the Marines escaped. If it held, they would be trapped and annihilated. Everything depended on Yang Gensi and his company of roughly 100 men. And here's where the fighting begins. The first American attack came at dawn. A platoon of Marines charging up the slope. They were thrown back. Then another attack came, and another. The Americans had air support. They had artillery. They had overwhelming firepower. Yang's company had rifles, grenades, and a single heavy machine gun. They fought with tactical cunning. They constantly moved their machine gun between positions, creating the illusion of a much larger, well-equipped force. They let the Marines get close, then unleashed a storm of grenades. For 8 hours, they repelled 9 separate assaults. 9 times the Marines clawed their way up the icy slopes. And 9 times they were driven back. The snow on the hill turned red, then black from gunpowder. But the cost was staggering. With every wave, Yang's company shrank. Men fell to bullets, to shrapnel, to the brutal, unforgiving cold. By late afternoon, the roar of battle faded. An eerie quiet descended upon the peak. Yang Gensi took stock. The craters were filled with the bodies of his men, his friends. He was the only one left who could still fight. He crawled from foxhole to foxhole, gathering the last of the grenades and ammunition from his fallen comrades. He had 5 grenades left, and a rifle with a handful of rounds. And this is the part nobody talks about. He wasn't just defending a piece of ground anymore. He was defending the memory of the men who had died beside him. Through the smoke, he saw them, a new wave. On about 40 American soldiers, a full platoon climbing steadily towards his position. They knew the resistance was broken. They thought the fight was over. Yang was one man against 40. He had no bullets left. He had no support. He had no hope of survival. So what does a man do when the only weapon he has left is himself? So you think you know the story. One man against an army. A lone ghost in the snow, holding back the red tide with a rifle and sheer will. The media loves this version. It sells books. It makes for a great movie trailer. But it's a lie. Not a total lie. Just a convenient one. And here's where the official story, the one you've been told, starts to fray at the edges. Simo Häyhä was never alone. The idea of his entire division fleeing is a fiction. He was part of the Finnish 6th Company of Infantry Regiment 34. They were fighting and dying right alongside him on the Kolla River. They weren't holding a mountain pass. They were holding a frozen, miserable line in the snow against overwhelming odds. The Kolla River became a national symbol. A phrase emerged. Kolla holds. It held because of men like Simo, but also because of the hundreds of other Finns in frozen foxholes, their fingers sticking to their triggers. To say Simo did it alone is an insult to their memory. Now, let's talk about what he actually did, because the truth is somehow more incredible than the fiction. You are there, it's 40 degrees below zero, Celsius. Your breath turns to ice crystals the moment it leaves your lips. You're 5 feet tall, barely visible against the endless white. The Soviets are coming. They have tanks. They have thousands of men. You have a Mosin Nagant rifle, no scope. Read that again. No scope. Scopes in that cold would frost over and become useless. They also forced a sniper to raise his head higher, creating a bigger target. So Simo used the iron sights, just a simple notch and post. He became the deadliest sniper in history, using nothing more than his own eyes. Think about that. He was making shots at 400 meters, with no magnification, just a steady hand in inhuman cold. His methods were ingenious. He would pack dense snow in front of his rifle barrel. Why? To stop the muzzle blast from kicking up a puff of snow, which would instantly give away his position. He kept snow in his mouth, not for water, but to cool his breath, to stop the warm steam from rising and betraying him to an enemy sniper. This wasn't a superhero. This was a farmer, a hunter who understood the cold. He used the environment as his greatest weapon. The Soviets gave him a name, Belaya Smert, the White Death. They were terrified of him, and they began to hunt him. This wasn't just a battle anymore, it was a personal vendetta. And they sent their own snipers after him. They failed. They called in entire artillery barrages on any position where he was suspected to be hiding. Imagine, dozens of high-explosive shells raining down, just for you. For 100 days, he was a phantom they could not touch. He amassed over 500 confirmed kills with his rifle, hundreds more with a Suomi KP/-31 submachine gun. The numbers are staggering. But numbers don't tell you about the fear, the psychological pressure, knowing that an entire army wants you, specifically you, dead. And then came March 6, 1940. Just days before the war ended. It wasn't a legendary sniper duel at dawn. There was no final showdown. It was random, brutal. A Soviet soldier fired blindly towards the Finnish lines. The bullet was an explosive type. It flew across the frozen battlefield and struck Simo in the lower left jaw. The impact shattered the bone. It tore through his cheek. It ripped half his face off. His comrades found him later. His head was a ruin of blood and bone, barely recognizable as human. They thought he was dead, just another body for the pile. They threw him on a sled with the others. The White Death was gone. The irony is sickening. After all his skill, all his cunning, all his legendary status, he was brought down by a stray shot from a soldier who likely never even knew who he hit. His war was over, but his story was about to take its darkest turn. -40 degrees Celsius. At this temperature, exposed skin freezes in minutes. Steel becomes brittle. Your own lungs burn with every breath you take. For Simo Häyhä, this was his hunting ground. You see, he wasn't just a soldier, he was a hunter, a farmer, and he understood this world of white silence better than the thousands of invaders sent to conquer it. He never used a telescopic scope. A rookie mistake, he thought. Scopes fog over in the brutal cold. They can glint in the low winter sun, giving away your position. A death sentence? So he used simple iron sights. He trusted his own eyes. And here's the part that shows you his level of mastery. He would pack snow in front of his rifle barrel. He'd pour a little water on it to freeze it solid. This prevented the muzzle blast from kicking up a puff of snow. A tiny detail that could mean the difference between life and death. He even kept snow in his own mouth. Think about that. He held snow on his tongue to stop his warm breath from turning into a telltale white plume in the frigid air. He was becoming part of the landscape. A ghost? The Soviets had a name for him. Belaya Smert, the White Death. They sent their own sniper teams to hunt him. They used counter-snipers. They pounded his suspected positions with mortar and artillery fire. One day, an artillery shell landed so close it tore the back of his coat off. But it didn't touch him. He just got up, dusted himself off, and went back to work. Because for him, this was work. A grim, terrible job that had to be done. But what is the cost of becoming a legend? You stop being a person. You become a symbol. A ghost story whispered by terrified enemy soldiers around a fire. But symbols don't feel the gnawing cold in their bones. Symbols don't remember the warmth of their farmhouse. Simo did, every single day. Then came March 6th, 1940, the 96th day of his war. The sun was low, the shadows were long. He took aim, but he never fired. The sound wasn't a clean crack, it was a dull, final thud. An explosive bullet fired from the darkness. It tore through his left jaw. The impact spun him around, throwing him face down in the blood-stained snow. Everything went black. His comrades found him later. They saw a pile of bodies and nearly left him for dead. But then a leg twitched. They rolled him over. Half of his face was gone. The man they called the White Death was drowning in his own blood, his head shattered. And he was loaded onto a sled with the other fallen. A week later, on the very day peace was declared, he woke up. The war was over. But for Simo Häyhä, a new war was just beginning. A war inside his own broken body. The question wasn't just if he would survive, but what would be left of the man if he did. The battle ended, but the snow kept falling. For 3 more days it fell, blanketing the ridge in a deep, reverent silence. It covered the brass casings. It covered the frozen earth. It covered the place where one man had made his stand. The official report is concise. Clinical. Corporal Eino Virtanen, missing in action. Presumed dead. A single line in a ledger filled with thousands of names. Just another number in a war of numbers. But here's the part nobody talks about. That single sniper held a Soviet battalion, nearly 500 men, at bay for over 48 hours. The delay wasn't just an inconvenience. It was everything. It gave Finland's exhausted 12th Division just enough time to fall back and fortify a new defensive line at the Kola River. A line that, against all odds, would hold. The Winter War ended in a treaty, not a conquest. Finland lost land, but it never lost its freedom. You can draw a straight line from the survival of a nation to the defiance of one man on a frozen hill. Think about that. The history books celebrate the generals who drew the maps. They praise the politicians who signed the treaty. The official narrative is clean, orderly, but it omits the chaos. It omits the impossible choices made in the blood and the snow. Go to the villages near that pass today. Talk to the children of the children who lived through that winter. They won't show you a statue. There is no grand memorial. Instead, they will simply point to the ridge itself. They have a name for it. Virtasen Vartio. Eino's guard post. They say that on the coldest nights, when the wind is still and the world is asleep, you can sometimes hear the faint crack of a single rifle. An echo that has refused to fade. It makes you question what a legacy truly is. We build monuments of bronze and stone to remember our heroes. We carve their names, hoping to make them permanent. But the stone weathers, the bronze tarnishes. The names are eventually forgotten by new generations. A choice, however, the choice to stay when all others have fled. Does that need a monument? Or does it become part of the land itself, a story whispered not by people, but by the wind that blows across the ridge? Which one, I ask you, truly lasts forever?